we hadn't raised millions of dollars. So that was a big learning curve, mindset, just talking freely to individuals about how much money they have and how much they want to invest. That was a whole mindset shift.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grenzig. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How are we doing?
We are good. We're hanging in there. We are hanging in there. Not much going on. Sort of slow and steady wins the race.
You're doing well with words today. That's good. No, today's good. Slow week. Not really a whole lot planned. Just found out, one of our properties had their gate driven into, which isn't the most fun. I don't know what it is about gates. Why do people drive into gates? I don't know if other people have this problem, but I feel like every time we put up a gate, somebody hits it.
The only time I've driven into a gate, I was in a car with my friend it was my freshman year in college. He was hammered drunk and we drove through a pole in a parking garage. But that was it. But this is, the gate just doesn't open fast enough. People just they just bang into them. And it makes no sense whatsoever that, every property have gates, people just run them down. And it's like the industry norm. It's like you put a gate up and tenant's going to ram it through. So it makes no sense to me. I mean, people just don't give a shit, but it's like a common theme, like 3-4 times a year. Probably more than that. We get an email from a manager that says, "Oh, a guy drove through the gate." It's like, what?
Yeah, no, it's mind blowing, but it is what it is. Well, that's why we're not doing the gate at the other property.
Exactly.
Basically, just don't want to spend $40,000 to have that headache in 5 months from now. So I don't know. It's interesting and go back and forth on if it's right or not. But awesome. We got a really great guest on today. Really interested to hear his story. Has a really good platform, doing a lot of work, and has been scaling up in the last couple of years. So from the outside in, I think it's going to be great. This is the first time we're talking, so I'm really excited to hear his story, get his experiences, and learn from him. So that being said, George, thanks for coming on, bud.
Thank you both for having me. And not to keep on with these gates, but you're dead on, man. We had
I'm happy to hear you're not the only one.
Yeah,
or we're not the only
week we had 3 gates, 3 different properties. And yeah, I don't know what it is.
So it's across the country. If you're listening and you've hit a gate, let us know and tell us why, because I'm very curious. Don't be bashful. Don't be shy. We won't tell anybody. We won't tell who it was, but I'm curious. Shoot me a DM on Instagram because I want to know why you hit a gate. I want to know why people do it.
I would love to see that survey. We're actually going to put it in our next newsletter because it's mind-blowing to me. 4,000 units, 20 properties, and the amount of time the tenant drives through a gate is mind-blowing to me. So it's I want to know why. So if you're a tenant and you've driven into a gate, please send us a message.
Awesome. George, you want to kick us off? Tell everybody listening a little bit about you, your background, your journey, and what you do.
For sure. So I am a real estate investor. Multifamily is what I focus on now. I've got a little bit over 1,700 units under management. Started with single family investments about 14 years ago. I was going to college at the time, studying to be an engineer, electrical engineer, realized I didn't want to do that. So I picked up a couple books, started looking at individuals that were successful and had a lot of wealth and how they gained that wealth. And it kept leading back to real estate at some point in their career. So I started digging into that and started doing deals on the side while I was still studying, and then eventually got my degree, went to work at UPS in the engineering department. Lasted only about maybe 2 years until I felt I was doing enough of the single family. Quit my W-2, started doing that full time. Then about 4 years ago, I kind of woke up and it felt like I had just been grinding for 10 years. And within those 10 years, I had decided to also open a construction company to help scale. Fix and flips is what we really started focusing on with the single family wholesales as well, but mainly fix and flips. And so yeah, I looked back and I had definitely built something, but it wasn't what I had pictured in the beginning and what I had set out to do. And that's when I started putting more focus towards multifamily and being able to build up that cash flow and that legacy type wealth. And at maybe about 1 year into that, I decided to just stop doing single family and just focus on multifamily. I do that with my investments now and also with my construction company.
Awesome. Was there any reason that you didn't say, hey, we're already doing these flips. Why don't I just, instead of selling it, refi it and pull out a ton of capital or pay off the hard money loan and start renting those out, because it was work you had obviously done. You knew what went into it. Was there a reason you didn't do the single family rentals, instead pivoted very quickly to the multifamily?
I did. So after 2008, I actually started in South Florida,
Mhm.
and then that's where I was born and raised. Then after 2008, we decided to move to Dallas because South Florida was just hurting for a while, to say the least. Um, and we came across Dallas, and I mean, the market was, compared to what we were coming from, it was doing great. Bought quite a few single families, and at that point, we were holding.
Mhm.
Um, and bought some smaller multifamilies, some fourplexes, eightplexes. Um, I didn't enjoy the property management part of it because at
Mhm.
that point it's not like you can hire a third party or have a property manager. I mean, you could, but your profits are going to be minimal. Your cash flow is going to be pretty minimal. Um, so I didn't really enjoy that part of it. Decided to, when the market started heating up a little bit more, decided to sell the properties and then just kind of went towards the fix and flips. I don't really have a explanation there other than I didn't realize that you can. At that time, I didn't realize I could syndicate multifamily and buy these bigger properties and be able to, have individuals on site taking care of it and more of managing them versus having to go get rent from a resident.
I hear you. Did you go down the path at all of trying to hire somebody for yourself to do the property management, or was it just you did and you still didn't like it, or were you the one actually out there banging the doors collecting rent?
Yeah, we never took it that far. It was us like
Mhm. Gotcha.
managing it and collecting the rent.
Gotcha. Was there any reason you didn't go down that route of like, hey, I hate this. Let me find somebody for 20 hours a week that can do this for me? I'm just
I
curious.
can't. I can't. I don't know. For some reason, I just didn't have and it might have been my coach and who I learned single
Hmm.
family from, which was Ron LeGrand. He didn't focus much on the hold. It was
Sure.
more of wholesaling and fix and flips. So that's kind of, that's what we were doing before 2008. Then we kind of adjusted because
Hmm.
of the cycle we were in, and then kind of just went back that way, back to the fix and flips.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. And when you started went back into the fix and flips, and then when did you start transitioning back into the multifamily stuff? Because you talked about the syndication side. Was it, a few years back you just started learning about that syndication model and being able to buy larger stuff, and you're like, wow, I don't have to, deal as much with the management side of things? Or what was that process like for you?
Pretty much. I mean, I landed a couple multifamily syndicators on the construction side, so I was doing their renovations
Hmm.
and started talking to them a little bit more about how they purchased the property and how that was structured. And till then, I had no idea that you could do a syndication. I thought, okay, you had to have millions of dollars to come in and buy one of these 100+ unit apartments. Um, so once I got introduced to that is when I really started to dig in and um, ended up getting a coach on that end, multifamily real estate, and yeah, that's took it from there.
So what was that like? Because I think it's interesting because we deal with tons of contractors, vendors, subcontractors. What was it like always for you coming to those properties and doing that work? Like you said, you just thought this was, hey, just, a rich family or a rich guy just has a ton of money and is buying this stuff. And then what was that process like of learning more about it? Was it just completely mind blowing, or was it like, oh wow, this actually makes a ton of sense?
At first the underwriting, is it's a little more complex than single family.
Mm.
So that took a little bit to kind of grasp. But I mean, with my background, engineering, I'm good with numbers. I caught on pretty quick, and yeah, I mean, it just made sense. The fact that you're buying more of a business versus buying a property, when you're doing single family, and that just little tweaks here and there can add so much value. I mean, once I realized that, I think that's what really made it, the light bulb go off and focus on multifamily.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is people don't understand that you are basically buying a business. You're buying something with payroll in place, different processes in place, different systems in place. You have clients, which are your tenants, that expect a certain way things are going to get done. And you are coming in and you are buying if you're buying existing multifamily, an existing business, and if you're going to make changes, there are hurdles you're going to have to overcome to put those different changes in place. And even just changing the management company is going to
Yep.
change a lot of things for people. And I don't think that's such a understood thing of like, hey, like you just come in and change management. They have a different way of doing things. So now your tenants are going to have to adopt slightly. And sure, most people don't have a huge problem because it's just, okay, how am I paying rent? It's not that big thing. Or how am I doing maintenance requests? But you start doing a lot of little different things, those things add up. And I think people just think, oh, I just come in and change management. And, it's like, don't miss a beat. But I think that changes a lot. So I think that's really interesting to hear you say that. Because
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
it's
a lot of
huge.
people underestimate the reputation too. I mean, if you're taking over, like you said, a business and it's got a bad reputation, um, there's a lot you got to do to kind of get over that hurdle.
Hmm. Have you guys experienced that a lot?
We have, I mean, we focus on heavy value add, so most of our properties don't have a good reputation when we buy them. um, so yeah, we've got to change everybody's perception on the owners and the property.
Hmm. So walk me through a little bit what it was like transitioning from just the construction side to actually going to that ownership side, because that's not a insignificant leap from just working on a property to then now, owning the property, understanding the business plan, having the systems in place, raising money from people. How did you make that transition? How did you think about that transition?
The biggest thing, so the acquisition side of it, let's start there. You got to find a deal to get started, right? The acquisition side, we brought in a lot of things from our single family over to multifamily, and we had success finding deals that way.
Hmm.
Um, I think a lot of multifamily investors don't do, we were calling, we were mailing, doing direct mail. Um, so we had success there. I think the biggest difference was, like I mentioned, the underwriting. So took us a while to get a good grasp on that. And then the biggest thing is we had never raised capital before. We had some couple lenders, a couple private lenders that pretty much funded all our single family fix and flips,
Hmm.
but we hadn't raised millions of dollars. So that was a big learning curve. Mindset, just talking freely to individuals about how much money they have and how much they want to invest. Um, that was a whole mindset shift.
Gotcha. I think it's interesting. John, when you transitioned from the same thing, but broker to owner, was there anything for you that was hard to overcome or super challenging or anything similar?
Not really. but then again, I'm also the one that, from when I was super young, I take a test and I walk out of the test and everyone's like, wow, that was hard. I'm like, what do you mean? I never thought anything was hard in my life. I never thought anything was challenging, but you get your grade back 2 days later and you get a 34 and you're like, I guess it was pretty hard. I guess I was wrong. So yeah, no, there's nothing I can point to that was challenging. The only thing that I talk about all the time was going from a broker where you're an expert in one zip code, knowing every owner, the sales of every building, and there being 5,000 properties in a zip code in New York. You take that and you go out of state and you realize that there are 500 buildings in Jacksonville that would check off 150 units or more, whatever. You get 500 properties and they're all over a major geographical region, and then you have to know the difference between the north side, the east side, the west side, the south side, the southeast side, the north, and then even inside those submarkets, there's the right side of the tracks and the wrong side of the tracks. So that was probably the biggest challenge, and that's something that you can only do so much research online. You got to go there, you got to feel it, you got to see it, you got to touch it. So other than that component, because you get a deal sent to you, you live in Dallas, you live in Miami, you live in New York, you live in Los Angeles, you live in Cleveland. If the deal is not in your backyard, you underwrite it. The numbers on the paper are going to tell you part of the story. The Google image search is going to show you one side of the story. The school reports that you can get are going to show you one side of the story. You get to the property and you realize that you're in a war zone. You may miss that in your underwriting because it doesn't really show the true depiction of what the actual property looks like. So that's the only thing that I can point to that was complicated, where it's, this deal makes so much sense. You get there, you're like, oh my God, I do not want to buy here. I mean, there was, one property I toured early on, 2014, and this is coming from Philadelphia, buying properties that were borderline dangerous. I remember we walked a property where I told the person in the passenger seat, I said, get in the driver's seat and keep the car on because this is rough. And then we opened the manager's office and it was like going into Fort Knox. He had like 37 cameras, everything was monitored. And I'm like, yeah, nah. It was 12 o'clock in the afternoon and there was, 75 cars in the parking lot. I'm like, I don't think this is what I want to buy. So, but that's something that you got to see, feel, and touch it. I don't think you can get a true understanding of an area by just doing it online. I mean, even our deal in Jackson, Mississippi was across the street from a Starbucks and a Whole Foods and super high-end retail. Now you go across the highway under the overpass, night and day. Now, yes, it path of progress. I get it, but you got to feel it. So I think that's the one thing where I would say was, complicated. And only time heals that wound. I don't think that's something you just pick up by, doing a couple extra Google searches. So but that's from my standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting now that I've been in real estate for 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, but especially the last 3 years is I've experienced that more. And you go to different, because we're in New York and we do everything out of state, but as you go to different markets, you drive around different neighborhoods, you look at deals and you start paying attention to a lot of that stuff. I've now brought that back to now, even when I'm driving around neighborhoods on Long Island or, when I was in Brooklyn, and you just start noticing those little differences. I think people, when you're not watching for it, you don't even realize it's necessarily a thing until it's like a big difference. You're like, oh, this is, way worse than where it was. But there's so many slight differences of just you could be driving down, a highway or, a main road, and all of a sudden you cross an intersection and it doesn't get way worse, but it just takes a half step down because you just look at the retail, you look at how clean it is. You just get a certain feeling for that. And that's something you would never necessarily get when you're on Google Maps or Google Streets. So I think that stuff is hugely important because, like you said, especially if you're going to do it out of state, if you're locally, and George, I don't know if you guys only do in Dallas, or I think you guys do in other markets in Texas as well.
We do. Yeah, no, it's a great point what John just said. And we went through that as well because we underwrote so many deals in Dallas and we just didn't feel comfortable buying at the prices that we're selling here in Dallas. So we started looking outside of markets and yeah, man, it's you make a left on one street and you make a right on that same street. It's night and day, depending where you're at. And I think that's in most markets. there's a lot we do before we actually physically go there. I mean, we take it to the point where we even call the police stations, and we talk to the local police, and they're usually pretty helpful. But still, I mean, we've been to a couple of them that we thought on paper looked great. We had looked around on Google Maps and made phone calls and everything. We did get some red flags with the phone calls, but once we got there, we were like, yeah, no way.
Yep.
We actually showed up. We were touring a bunch of properties that day, and we showed up. It was pretty late, maybe like around 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And man, we did not feel safe walking around that property. And yeah, it's just one of those things.
No, I tell people that all the time. I mean, you gotta, go after hours and see what's going on, because the truth with anything is that, anything can look really good when a broker is about to do a tour or an owner is going to tour you through it, because he knows you're coming.
Mm-hmm.
Go there, if you get into town early, go there that night. If you're there late, stay later. But I mean, you can fall in love with a deal and then underwrite it and find out it's shit, or you can fall in love with a deal underwriting it and see it and realize it's no good. Is there a right or wrong way to do it? No. If you're in your backyard and you don't mind taking a ride, don't waste your time underwriting. Go drive the deal. If you're out of state, you probably can't do it that way. So you got to make it make sense. And you could fall in love with numbers on a paper, but you got to put eyes on something. You got to see, feel, and touch it. And you can't see, feel, and touch it for 35 minutes to an hour and a half with a broker or an owner. It's going to appear its best. The owner's going to all the bad tenants, say, stay inside, don't come out, don't do this. I'll take $20 off your rent. Like, he's trying to get rid of it. So especially the heavy lifting stuff, because we do the same thing. So you got to be aware of that. And when you buy that, you got to realize that, like you said before, your reputation, you're not just shaking that off by putting a sign in the ground, right? Like, there's a lot that comes with fixing that stuff. And that's the stuff that, how do you underwrite it when a broker says the market occupancy is 97%? Well, yes, that's perfectly stable, clean 2015, 2020 built property. Show me a 1970s deal that was taken over from a guy that owned it for 20 years and it was ran into the ground. That's not running at 97%. So those are things that you just got to be aware of. And I think the easiest way to do that, like I said, is you got to get there. You got to see. You got to see, feel, and touch it. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and just understand where you get yourself involved in. Because that is by far the most challenging thing out of state, because you don't know what you don't know. And when you get there, you have these high expectations, and it typically doesn't work that way. And we joke around about it. I don't like driving our investors to our properties because they're not necessarily the nicest. They're not the sexy properties. The sexy properties are the ones downtown that have elevators and pools and cabanas and golf simulators. If we put a golf simulator in a property, I mean, that would just be, it would be a weapon. The golf clubs would use as weapons. So you have to understand that. You gotta know what you know and know what you don't know. And the only way to figure that out is to get there, see, feel, and touch it, walk it, see what happens.
Yeah.
I think it's important. It's funny you mentioned Houston and turning. I do remember at one point when we were in Houston looking at a deal, we were like driving down and we were like, I think you could see like a bunch of retail on the right-hand side and there was just nothing on the left. We're like, are we turning right or left? And we ended up turning left. We were just like, shit.
Yeah, Houston's a whole other monster just because of the zoning and
Yeah,
that was one of the only places that I toured. When I went home, I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of property here. Like, it's just, and you could be in the same submarket and one block over. I mean, we've owned in a ton of markets, and I've been in a lot of different places. And that was one market I left. I said, that might be a little too big. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get used to that market.
Yeah. So I have a question which might be helpful for somebody listening. How well did you know Houston before you started looking in that area?
Didn't know it at all.
So how did you then go through that process of educating yourself on the area? Did you try to get construction work there? Did you just start driving there? Like, what was that process like for you?
Looking at the data, first of all, the research and what's the population growth, what's the crime, what's everything, right? Then once I had a good feeling about that, and I knew we wanted to be there, at least number-wise, I knew we wanted to be there. Then it was going over there, taking trips, touring properties, touring the city in general, the areas, the submarkets. Um, it took a while to feel comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is so many people want to drive there once or go and visit a market, and you go see the deal, drive a couple blocks, see little things, and you feel comfortable. The amount I've learned in certain markets over 3-4 years of just consistently looking at stuff there, every time you look at a new deal, you just learn something new or slightly different, or you learn a new neighborhood. And you have rough ideas of rough areas, but until you really like dig in to a market or a specific neighborhood or a specific deal, you don't really know that area until you get in there. I mean, in markets, we're in Jacksonville and Columbus, we probably know that market like 20-25% of it. And John's been in Columbus for 5-6 years. We've been in Jacksonville for about 3 or 4. That's not that much. There's still so much we don't know. And somebody coming into a new deal, I mean, you're just consistently learning more, picking up new things, or things change too over the years. So you've got to stay on top of things. So I think it's so important to dig in and understand exactly where you're buying.
Yeah, I think it's very important to talk to the locals. Like every time we go to tour property, we're talking to everybody. If we're staying at a hotel, we're talking to everybody that's working there, and we ask them about the areas, and anywhere we stop, we're talking to the locals and just getting their feel for it as well.
I don't think that's something that's done enough, right? Because anyone can take the regular expenses and market rate stuff. Anyone can put it in a spreadsheet, right? That's not – when you first underwrite a deal and you're underwriting a 100 unit, it's a little bit harder, and then a 300 unit, and you have a lot of rent roll, you have a lot of data. But the part that gets lost is that, right? When you get to a property, it's not just the physical property. It's everything surrounding there. Whether you're getting food, you're talking to the waitress. Or the waiter. When you're getting a drink at night, you're talking to the bartender. When you're eating dinner, you're talking to this person. When you're at the hotel, you talk to the person checking you in. When you see people that are around, you just grab them and, hey, what's going on here? What do you like? I don't think people do that enough on their first deal, right? After you want to deal in a market, if you buy a deal similar, maybe you don't have to do it as much. But if you're new to a market, there is nothing better than local intel. I mean, these people see, feel, and touch it and breathe it day in and day out. And they're going to say, oh, my God, no, never go to that side of town. It's never going to get any better. And then flip side, they may say, oh, no, this is where everyone's talking about it. And I think that people don't do that enough, because there is nothing better than local intel when you're just, what's going on, right? What do you want to know? And they're going to tell you the stuff that you're not going to get in the reports. You're not going to get it in the data. They're not going to – they're going to tell you the stuff that matters, that could be a very good persuasion to buy or not to buy based on – can't talk to one person to make a decision. You talk to a couple people, 5, 10, 20 people, whatever it is, you're going to really learn. I mean, even at the airport, when you land and you're waiting for your flight to go home, or even there, you're talking to people that, if they're getting on a plane, that means they're either traveling to or from the location. Or why are you coming here? What are you doing here? Oh, no, we have a huge headquarters here, whatever it is. But those are people that are traveling there. So there's something going on. You want to know what's going on. If they're getting on your flight going home, well, then they're from where you are. So you want to know what they're doing there, right? And that's all data that, underwriting, that's not numbers on paper. That's more, the feeling side of it, does it feel good or does it not? And that can only be done by asking the questions and talking to as many people as you can.
Yeah, I can give you a quick example on that. We toured one property that numbers were looking amazing, and it was a heavy lift. There was a lot of work that needed to be done. And when we toured it, we saw the potential in the property, like the physical property. And then we still weren't quite sure about the area. It looked like maybe it was transitioning, but couldn't quite tell. A couple blocks down, we saw some police officers. So we pulled up next to them, just started talking to them and asking them about the area. And then we asked them about the apartment and that specific area. And, man, they were just like, don't do it. Like they told us straight up, they're like, nah, man, we're there every freaking day. He's like, look, it may transition, but we're talking years from now. We didn't go solely 100% off of that, but it definitely helped us make our decision.
So what, because I think it's interesting. I've not heard somebody else tell me that they call the local police station. When you call, what is that conversation like? Do you tell them, hey, we're looking at buying X, Y, and Z property. We're just trying to see, what the crime is like. Like, how does that conversation go? Because I think it's interesting.
Basically what you said, and then sometimes they'll tell us, oh, you know what, you need to speak to so and so. That's their area, and then they'll put us in touch with them, or sometimes they'll know right off the bat. Super helpful. Like,
Yeah, typically in the apartment world, if you make a call to the local precinct or whatever, and hey, I'm buying 123 Main Street, they're like, oh yeah, 3-4 times a day domestic violence, or oh yeah, no, we're there all the time for gunshots. Like, they're gonna be the ones that they're gonna tell you the worst of the worst, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna say, hey, now you got to remember, like George said, that's worst of the worst. If that worst of the worst is they're saying, oh, it's never, okay, now let's find out the good stuff. Then you got to make a risk reward decision. But
right.
But yeah, anytime you have those conversations, you give them an address and they're going to say, oh yeah, we haven't been there, in 2 years or whatever it is. I mean,
Exactly.
those are things you want to hear. You don't want to necessarily, or maybe you do want to hear that they're there every day because you can possibly fix that. Then the question is, what, if they're there at your property every day, well, what about the surrounding? Oh, we're never there. Those are managed really well, right?
Yeah.
Then,
That's a great, that's usually
gold.
what we try to,
you hear that and you're like, okay, I can fix this problem, right? I just got to clean up my shit. If they're like, oh no, it's just another day in, South whatever, you got to think twice about it, right? If every complex has constant calls and constant police activity, then, think about what you're doing. But for the most part, you want to see what your site has and then what everyone else, okay, well, tell me more. And you just, it's like anything else, right? It's, you got to ask the question. And if you don't know you're asking the right question, just tell them to elaborate. You could say, well, tell me more like 4 or 5 times, and they'll probably keep going before you even ask another question. So you just want to find out more about your property, local properties, areas, good, bad, and different.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so huge because I was going to say having a high crime property could also be an opportunity. But like you said, if it's the total area sucks or just has problems, you're probably not going to solve it by just owning that one property. So I think that's really huge. So George, when you started getting into it, did you go right into the more distressed stuff because you had the construction background, or did you start off with more of the stable stuff to kind of get your feet wet?
The worse, the better is the way I saw it. Yeah. And that's kind of, with single family, we were doing the same. We would go after the fire damage, the ones that are falling apart. More opportunity there, and I feel comfortable with my construction company doing the work, that it's going to get done right. So yeah, that's what we started attacking.
Awesome. And I love that. And how has it been? Because we talk about this side of the thing all the time. It's the competitive advantage and what do you bring to the table. Having construction in-house is obviously, a thing that I would say 95% of companies outsource to other people, if not hire. How has that conversation been like for you with other people having that in-house? Is it something that you found that a ton of people find a tremendous amount of value in and comfort in? Do they not really care? Like, how does that conversation, especially with investors, go?
With investors, it's a certain comfort level for sure. They like it. They feel more comfortable that the business plan is going to get done. It's going to get done right. And yeah, I mean, mainly positive stuff. I haven't really got any negative feedback for that.
I'm curious, when you are syndicating, because we'll go out and get a few bids, is that something you guys also do just to show like your investors, like, hey, we're not charging this ridiculous amount to the property because I'm going to line my own pocket? Do you guys get extra bids so people understand kind of what the market is, or people are just at this point like, hey, you know what you're doing, we trust you, we're investing in you type of thing?
So internally, we are getting, if it's something we're going to subcontract, which a good majority of the work, that's what we do, is we're getting several bids and we're going with not necessarily the cheapest, but the one that we know is going to be the best. And none of our investors really seem to be concerned about that. They trust that we're doing that, but it's there. I mean, if anybody ever wanted to see it, we can definitely supply it, and we keep a good record of it just in case that ever comes up.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So when did you guys start actually syndicating deals? How many years ago was that?
3.
3. Okay.
3.
And where did you guys start? How did that, what was that first deal like? Did you have partners? Did you do it yourself? How was that like? Because I think people will get some value out of that.
Yeah, so like I stated earlier, our biggest weakness was the raising capital part.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to partner with somebody that was strong in that on that end, and also had more of a track record as far as multifamily. So we did partner with somebody. It was a smaller property. Not that I suggest to start smaller. I
Mm-hmm.
suggest 100 plus units is what I suggest. But
How big was that one?
37. It was
Okay.
almost, yeah, almost to the point where it almost didn't have to be syndicated, but it did. So that one was it was a lot of work, a lot of more hands-on because of the size of the property.
Mm-hmm.
But a good experience. And then from there we went to a 216 unit one was our next deal, and that one a lot smoother.
That's good. Are you now at the point where you've decided to raise capital yourself? Are you still partnering with people because it's just something you don't want to have to deal with, and you'd prefer to just handle the asset management construction side of things? Where are you guys at today?
No, we feel 100% comfortable raising capital now.
Mm-hmm.
Been able to build a nice platform, and we've got investors reaching out to us every day, pretty much.
Awesome. And what was that transition like for you? Like, when did you start to feel comfortable having those conversations, raising money? Was it right away and you just needed to build up a pipeline of investors so you felt comfortable with the raise? How was that process like?
Kind of got thrown into it on our second deal. So we went into it with the same idea on the first one. We were going to have a partner that was going to raise the majority of it, or all of it, actually, was the idea. But they were spread a little thin. So we kind of had to jump in, and luckily I had already started with social media and just, putting stuff out there. And man, we raised it quick and easier than we thought.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Was there anything either in like the first deal you did from like the ownership side or the first time you tried to raise money that was surprising to you, was different, learned a ton from, like anything you can share that you think would be impactful for anybody listening?
Something that we did that was good or bad.
Either way, yeah, we love bad.
Some
we
type
also
of learning experience of what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm trying to think of something. Have a system in place before, like, to follow up with your leads and to kind of push them through that funnel. We were a little unorganized the first time, and probably took a lot more work than it should have.
Yeah. Or just spreadsheets and just following up with people at first.
Yeah, I mean, now we have a CRM, and we have an investor portal, and we put all our notes in there, and we're very strategic about our follow-ups and our drip campaigns, and just more automated.
Gotcha. I'm curious, just for my sake, if anybody listening gets out of it, great. What do you guys use for CRM, emails, investor portal?
Yeah. So we use ActiveCampaign for CRM and email marketing. It does both in one, which before we had MailChimp and Pipedrive, but they didn't quite talk to each other as smooth as you'd like them to. So we switched over to ActiveCampaign. Investor Portal, I've used the big names, Juniper Square and IMS, but I don't like them. I think they're crazy expensive and they're not very user friendly for the investor. So we've been using Syndication Pro. It's not a huge company, but they continue to do updates, and I like the feel of it, and I like the direction they're heading. So that's worked out. Did I miss something?
No, that was it. I think it's interesting. We just actually switched over to ActiveCampaign as well for our email management and CRM and stuff. Because we went through, how many different things on the CRM side and the email side. We also use Juniper Square right now for the investor portal, which is good. I think it's just, like you said, it's probably more robust than we need. And because it's more robust, it's a little bit pricier.
Our contract expires with them at the end of this year, so we are actively shopping for a new portal.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We did really well. Our pricing, compared to other people that use them, we have a very good price, but it's really robust, and we don't need all the features. So it's something that we're considering. But no, ActiveCampaign so far has been good. We're still tweaking the CRM component of it, but we've tried, there's so many platforms out there, and inevitably you just got to see what works best for where you're at. But I think trial by fire is probably the best way for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. I think that's an awesome place to wrap up. George, I think that was fantastic. I think you gave people a ton of information. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to get in touch with you, follow along, learn more about you, where can they do all that stuff?
Yeah, they can, if they search my name or they search Elevate on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, we're kind of all over those three platforms. If you go to my website, elevatecig.com, I've got a free ebook on there on how to invest in multifamily and all the benefits. And then if they want to go ahead and shoot me an email at George or Jorge, pronounced either way, JORGE at elevatecig.com. I can, if they mention this podcast, I'll send them over a couple different checklists. I've got a due diligence checklist and questions to ask a deal sponsor and some other stuff I can send.
Awesome. Beautiful. Guys, definitely go hit them up. Definitely get some of that information because I'm sure it's going to be useful. Having a contractor tell you what to look for is probably going to be helpful. So definitely hit them up. Definitely go find out if it's something of interest to you. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are subscribed, please send it to a friend, family member, colleague, or even somebody you hate that you think would get a tremendous amount of value out of it. George, once again, thanks for coming on, bud. This is great.
Thank you, guys.